Hello again everyone. Today we're going to talk about more PowerShell, but we're going to talk about PowerShell arrays and we're going to talk about PowerShell data storage. So that's going to include things like arrays and hash tables, and we'll have a look a bit about PS objects. We'll also look at multi-dimensional arrays. So we'll look at 1D, 2D and 3D arrays that we can do within PowerShell. So I hope you enjoy this content and let's get straight into the demos. Okay then, so we're here up in VS Code again, and we're going to start looking first of all at arrays. But before we do that, we need to go and check out first of all variables again. So if we do something like $var equals, let's do Apple inside here and go and run this code and then go and call this $var down here, you'll notice it just returns Apple. We could actually run something else on here called .getType, with a couple of curlies on the end of it, and you can see that this is actually a type of string and it's actually got a base type of System.Object. Now, what about if we want to add multiple things to this? PowerShell's quite nice with data manipulation in this sense. When it comes to scripting, it's quite easy. We don't have to declare types if we don't want to. That can cause problems later on, but we'll get into that in another video. And if we want to actually make this a variable, we can very easily just add more things to this. Apple, berry, and another comma down there for pear. And we'll just go and run that line again with F8, and we'll go and call that $var now. You can see we've got apple, berry, and pear. Now, what about if we just zoom in here a little bit? What about if we do that same command $var.getType now? Now we can see that this is actually an object with those two square brackets. This allows us to see that this is actually an array. Now there is other ways of declaring arrays. For example, we can actually create something called a blank array as well. So if we just comment out that code at the top here, and if we do $fruits, okay, we put an equals on there, @ sign, and then two brackets like that, and run this. This here is declaring that this is actually an array. It's an empty, completely blank array. We can add data to it later on if we want to. So if I go and now look at $fruits in my terminal down here and look at getType, we'll go and run that. You'll see this again is an object. But if I go and run $fruits to go and see if there's anything inside here, there is nothing inside here at the moment. Now, if I want to add more things to this fruits, I can do if I really, really want to. I can use a special little operator to do this. So I can do $fruits up here and do plus equals. This is where the magic happens, the little plus equals sign this is. This just adds something to this array. So we can add to these fruits apple, for example. Now if I go and run that line, and now I go and call the variable of $fruits to see what's inside it, you'll see that I've got apple. Let's go run that down here in the shell as well. Let's make a bit of room. We'll just do clear on that, just so I can bounce this back up to the top. Now if I do $fruits again, and we'll do plus equals, and we won't do apple this time, we'll do pear, we'll run that thing again. So now if we call $fruits, we can see we've got apple and pear. So we're adding stuff to this array that we can then call in future points within the script itself. Now we could, if we wanted to, actually declare a variable in this way and actually add some kind of starting data to it if we wanted. So let's just restart that shell. Let's go and kill that terminal. And let's go and whoopsie, there we go. Completely kill it. Let's go restart that shell again. So we're doing a .pwsh to a PS version table here. We'll just check out what version we're on. We're in PowerShell version 7.3.5, so the latest version. It's all good. You don't need the latest version to do this. This will all work on, I think, all the way back to like PowerShell 2. So let's try another array. Let's do $veg. Okay, and we will declare not a blank array this time, but we will declare an array that's got some existing data in it. So let's do tomato. I know, fruit or vegetable, who knows. Potato, and let's go do one more veg. Let's do carrot. Okay, so let's go run that $veg, and we can go call $veg here, tomato, potato, and carrot. We could also add additional stuff to it as well. So if we did $veg and we went plus equals and we added something else to this, maybe we want to add another vegetable, eggplant, okay, or aubergine, whichever one you want. So if we add that eggplant in here and then call $veg again, we can see it's added to the bottom. Now each of these have individual positions. Okay, so this $veg is now currently loaded into memory with position 0 through to position 4. All right, so we can call individual positions inside this variable. So if, for example, we called $veg, now all this is kind of loaded, and we called position 0, you can see I'm calling tomato. If I call position 3, on the other hand, I'm calling eggplant. So tomato, potato, carrot, and what got added afterwards, eggplant inside here. We can also call multiples. So if I do, for example, 0.2, that's actually going to call 0, 1, and 2, everything in between as well. So that's kind of cool. We can also replace things actually inside that as well. So say I don't want a potato there anymore. We know that potato is at position 1. So we could now do something like this. We could say array 1 is now equal to, not potato, not carrot, not eggplant, I need another vegetable, sprout. Okay, add that in there. Now if I go and call $veg, you should see that I've got tomato, sprout, carrot, and eggplant. So we can actually edit things at individual positions here in the variable itself. Now, just another note here with variables, you don't have to have the same data type inside each individual slot. So you could do something like $stuff, if I wanted to, and do at position 1, I've got apple. At position 2, I've got 2.4. At position 3, I've got thing. And at the next position, I may have a currency of £10. Okay. And now if I go and run this variable, there is something that goes a bit wonky here. This is the £10 option. I'd have to declare the type. But if I change this around, go and run that, let's do $stuff, you'll be able to see I've got apple, 2.4, thing, and 10. Each one of these has their own individual type. So if we run something like stuff 0.getType, go and run that, we can see that this is actually a string. If I go and run stuff 1 get type, you'll see this is actually a double, which is a number that is actually got I'll start again. This is a number that's actually got a decimal point in it. This is something called System.Double. If I go and run something like 3 here, you'll see this is an int32 or a 32-bit integer, i.e. the number of 10. That's not binary 10, that's 10. So if I clear this off now, there is another thing we can actually play with here. All right, so let's come up to this selection of code and let's just comment this out. We'll use a big block of comments here to do this. It's a little commenting trick. So if you use the open caret and then close caret with a pound sign for the Americans or a hash sign for everybody else, you can comment out whole blocks and you can actually collapse that. If you're using Powershell ISE, you need a plugin to collapse that. This is an interesting trick. If I just launch Powershell ISE here on my computer and I go and take this same block of code with Powershell ISE, if you paste it in there, notice you actually get this little option where you can actually collapse it down. VS Code does not do that by default, but Powershell ISE does. Anyway, continuing on. We need to talk about 2D arrays. Okay, so we can change the way this works. What we've just seen is a one-dimensional array. All right, it's just a single line with multiple different elements inside it. We can create 2D arrays. These are kind of like matrices, okay, of data. If you can imagine just grids of boxes. So we've got individual rows and we've got columns actually within this 2D array. Now to define a 2D array, things look a little bit different. So what we need for a multi-dimensional array is an actual grid, okay? So think of it a little bit like this. So if I do XX, that would be, for example, a grid, okay? So you've got different positions here as well. You've got a line of 0 and a line of 1, and then you've actually got individual positions within that grid. So you've got a position of 0 and a position of 1. So each element within this grid, this 2x2 grid, is going to have its own specific key. So we can create one of these by using, let's just do a $array for array. we need to use the new object command. Now this is going to create a new PowerShell object that's going to allow us to store information. And the object type I want, okay, is this. So doing that little 2 square brackets with a comma inside, it defines this as a multi-dimensional array, and I've got to decide how big that grid is actually going to be before I can actually insert data into it. So unlike a normal array, I've got to kind of figure out how much data I've got before I go start inserting stuff into this. You can add stuff later to it, but you're going to need to add some code around it with some for each loops to be able to do it. So this is going to be a 2 by 2 array. So this is actually going to be a 2D array of length 4. It's going to be length 4 because we're going to have 4 individual elements inside here total of our grid. So let's start adding some data in. Now the way we're going to do that is we're going to start in the top left of this. We're going to go 0, 0. Okay, so that's 0.0 on the row and 0.0 on the column. Okay, and we're going to add in the number of 10. And then we're going to continue on. We're going to do a, and we're going to add 0, 1, and that's going to be something like $false. Okay, we'll add a boolean for that one. Then we'll do $a, and we'll do 1, 0. So the next row down, but 0 is 1 in, and that's going to be red. And we'll just red 0, and we'll just do $a, and we'll do one more thing in here. We'll do 1, 1 to define the whole grid of information, and we'll call that blue. Okay. So now if I go and run this code here, that should load everything in for me. There we go. Let's clear that screen out. Now if I just call that variable, so call A, I'm going to get all 4 of those things come out. 10, false, red, blue. It's going to work its way through that grid. But I can actually call individual objects inside that. So 0, 1, and I'll be able to see that that is actually equal to false. Or if I go to 1, 1, that's actually going to be equal to blue. All right, so we now have a slightly more complex example here of 2D arrays and a more practical example of 2D arrays. So let's kind of run this, see what the output is, and then we'll step through and kind of explain everything that this is actually doing. So if I run this whole thing now, you'll notice the output that I get here is student 1 grades, student 2 grades, and student 3 grades. So let's just scroll back up here. My shell's being a little annoying. Here we go. So student 1 grades, student 2 grades, and student 3 grades down here. Let's just rerun that to make sure it looks a little bit nicer. Oops. There we go. My shell's playing up at me. Right, so how does this kind of work? Well, what we've got at the top here is we've got our 2D array. All right, so notice this first block here, this at symbol up here, along with these 2 parentheses. This is defining the whole array. And then we've got different positions here. So we've got position 0, we've got position 1, and we've got position 2. These are going to be the rows in our 2D array. And then inside that, what we've actually got is we've got the data. So we've got things like 85, 92, 76, and 88. Each of these are going to have positions as well. So that would be position 0, position 1, position 2, and position 3. So we've got rows and we've got columns going on down here. So we want to process through each of these individual things and output the data in a nice format to be able to read that in the shell. So the first thing we've got here is we've got our for loop, and we've got for $row0, row less than grades.length row plus plus. So what we want to do is we want to process through each individual row down here. So here's our row. We're starting at row 0, so we're going to process through this specific row here. If the row is less than grades.length, and grades.length down here we know is actually going to be 0, 1, 2, 3, because computers start at 0, but it's 4 elements inside there. It's going to write to the host student grades. So let's get rid of some of this so far. And let's go and control to that. Make this a little bit neater up. So write students row plus 1 and then grades. So that's going to write this element down here. So remember, this would be 0 at this point because it's $row and the first row here is 0. So we've got to add plus 1 on there for it to kind of make sense, because we don't count it starting at 0, but computers do. We just add 1 onto there to make it make a little bit more sense. Now we're going to start processing that first element there, this first collection of student stuff, and we want to process through each of these individual numbers and print them out accordingly. So what we have is we have a second for loop. We have a for loop inside the for loop, because we want to loop through each individual row, and then we want to loop through each individual number in each individual row. Okay, so the second for loop is to define the columns, which are these entry points here, and for each column starting at 0 and working through 1, 2, 3, 4 row dot length column plus plus. So step through each individual column here. Then depending on the position of the column, so the first position is going to be 0, so we're going to change this to math. The second position going to be 1, we're going to change this to English, and so on and so forth. This is using a switch case to do this rather than using an if-else loop. Otherwise we would have lots of if-else loops down here. The grade is finally going to be defined as grades $row $column. So at the first point here, this first grade is going to be row 0 column 0, so it's going to access this specific grade up here. And then what it's going to do is it's going to actually set that grade down here, and we're going to also write $subject, and we can see that $subject is actually going to be set here to math. So this is going to write out math with a grade of 85. So that's a lot of green on the table there. Let's get rid of some of that. And if we just change that to red, you can see that that's actually going to write out math at 85. It's then going to continue stepping through this. Thanks to these magic little pluses, what that's going to do is it's going to iterate the row from 0 to 1 to 2 to 3 every time there's a loop going on through there. So we're done with 0. We're done with 0 there. It's now going to iterate over to 1. So for each column, we're going to do column plus plus, and once this is looped through 1, 2, 3, 4 times, i.e. the length of the row, then this for loop at the top can kick in and kick down to the next position in the 2D array. So that's a kind of example there for how 2D arrays can actually take data, store data, and how you can read out of them by using these nested for loops to actually pull data out. But let's go and have a look at another way of actually storing some data inside PowerShell. Alright, so another way of doing data storage here is something called a hash table. Now sometimes hash tables also get called key value pairs, and that would be the same sort of thing. We have a hash table up here at the top. We have John, Alice and Bob inside student grades. Now this looks similar to what we saw before in an array, but there's a very subtle difference here. So if we look back here in an array, arrays use parentheticals, okay? There's normal standard brackety kind of things. On the other hand, hash tables here use curly brackets. Now, they've got some strange names as well. If you look these up on Wikipedia, some people call these Scottish brackets. I know, sounds weird, but honestly, go look at the Wikipedia article. I promise you, it says Scottish brackets, curly brackets, mustache braces. Some people even call these things seagull brackets. I don't know. There'll always be curly brackets. But what we've got inside here is we've got a key, John, and a value 85, a key, Alice, and a value of 92, and a key, Bob, of a value 76. So instead of accessing individual items in here using things like 0, 1, and 2, we're going to access elements in here by using these keys instead. And that's the difference here with hash tables versus normal arrays. So if I go and load this in here, and just load that line in, and we'll just go do $student grades. Okay, I'm going to run that. You'll see that I've got name and value returned here. As I said, key value, name value. It depends on what language you're using, what book you're reading, but it's the same thing. What I can do is I can actually now actually look at individual things inside here. So we can access values by using specific keys. So in this case, John's grade is equal to student grades John. So if we just go and run that block there, you'll see what's returned is 85. It doesn't return John equals 85. What it's done is it's accessed that specific key and returned that specific value to my shell here. So now if we define $John grade into equals students grades John, run that, then what we'll actually be able to see is John grade will return just 85. And if we run a johngrade.getType on this, just to see what returns, whoops, it helps if I can type. This is actually returning an int 32. So if I go and run, for example, student grades John here, paste that in here, and then run another get type, you'll see again int 32 returned. But if we go and run something like $student grades and do a .get type on the whole thing, you'll see this is returning a hash table. So what we can also do is we can modify things. So we can see down here, Bob is currently set to 76. And if we go and return $student grades, you'll see that, yeah, Bob is set to 76. But we can modify this. So we can modify a specific value of Bob to 88. If I go and run that one line there, and then go and rerun student grades, what you'll see is we've got Bob value of 88. So hash tables, the data inside them is easy to manipulate. We can also add new lines. So if we want to add Lisa here, Lisa is now equal to 90. Go and run that. And we go $run student grades and go and execute this. You'll see we've now got Lisa being added in with a value of 90. Now, this is no different really to what we did with arrays, but there is one key point, and it's the next element down here. We can remove a key value pair. Okay, we can go in here and we can actually remove an individual item inside this hash table. We can't do that with arrays. To do that, we'd have to rebuild the array itself. There is actually something else that we can actually do with arrays. There's a special array type that allows us to remove stuff, but that's something slightly different, and we'll check that out in a minute. But if we want to do this with key value pairs, we can just use this .remove element down here, and we can actually remove Alice directly from student grades. Run that again, and Alice has now gone. We can also iterate over the entire hash table by running this little for each loop. For each key in studentgrades.keys, so that's each individual key down here, write the value host of key and value. So if we go and run that, it's going to be Bob 88, Lisa 90, and John 85. That's going to output the whole thing for me. Okay? So those are hash tables. You'll see hash tables returned in many different things. If you start interacting with APIs and REST APIs, lots of data gets returned within hash tables. All right. So we're going to step back to arrays for a moment, because I said there was something I couldn't do, and that was to actually remove elements from a basic array. Now there is sort of different ways of doing this with PowerShell version 7, but if you're using PowerShell 5.1 for your code internally, you might bump into these problems, and this is still applicable through to PowerShell 7 as well. So it'll work all the way up. So if we look at this array of $stuff, right, we're going to run that. Again, we've got $stuff inside here. We've got apple, berry, pear. That's fine, okay? And again, if we do get type inside here for this specific method, go and run that. It's an object of 2 square brackets and a system.array. Now, what about if I want to remove something? So something very basic might be, for example, remove. And if we try and remove apple here from this array, we're going to get an error. The exception calling this collection was of a fixed size. Now you can tell if an array is in a fixed size, because what you can do, just delete that, what you can do is $stuff and run this is fixed size. Okay, run that, it tells you true or false. Now what this fixed size means, it doesn't mean that we can't add stuff to it, but it does mean that we can't remove stuff from it, all right? But we can use a special array type to get around that. Now, if we didn't use a normal array like this, we didn't just add stuff to $stuff, we did something like this. Let's paste a bit of code in here. $list is equal to new object System.Collections.ArrayList. This is where the magic comes. Now, if I go and run this, just this single line here, okay, and now I do $list.getType, all right, you'll notice this is an array list. Now, what about happens if I run $list.is fixed size? False. So we can remove things, but let's add stuff to this first. Now there's some more functionality. We can use $list.add, okay? And then what I want to do is I want to add apple in here, And then I want to add some more elements down here. So I'm just going to copy that. I'm going to come down here, paste that in there, come down here, paste that in there. And we're going to bring that one over here, cut that up there, pop that in there. And yes, I know there is way faster ways of doing this. Let's just put some magic brackets inside here. Oh, if you don't know what I did there, if you're in VS Code, if you hold Control and Alt and press up or down, we can get multiple things at once. Okay, that's quite a neat little trick to do if you need to edit multiple lines in one go. So if we go and add all of those things in, run all of that code, it runs through it all, we can now do $list. We should see apple, berry, pear. Now it's just a normal array, so we can still iterate over it. We can still do position 0, we can still do position 1, that's fine. But what we can also do is we can actually look at accessing items in a different way and removing items in a different way. So maybe I want to remove berry. So what I can do now is I can do $list remove, all right? And I can remove this based on position. So I could say something like remove 1, all right? And I'm going to go run that, not remove 1, remove at position 1. So delete what's ever in position 1. Now if I do $list again, you'll see that I'm retrieving only apple and pear because berry has been removed from that array list, right? You could also remove things by the actual name of the thing that's in there. So you can do not remove at, you can actually do the command just straight remove. So if you do remove apple, run that again, and put this in some curlies, not some curlies, some double quotes to denote a string. Run that thing, do $list, and we have just pear remaining for us. So this concludes looking at some different ways of storing data. We went through and had a look at basic one-dimensional arrays in here. We also went through and had a look at how to create 2D arrays like matrices of data. Inside here we then went and had a bit more of an example of these 2D arrays and how to iterate over multiple elements within those 2D arrays via their rows and via their columns. We also had a look in here at a hash table. Remember, the main difference there is we've got curly brackets rather than parentheses or normal brackets on there. And then finally we took a look at this final thing called an array list, which allows us to manipulate arrays in a little bit more detail, actually remove items from them. There is reasons why you would use an array list rather than a normal array and vice versa. The main thing is really performance. Array lists aren't as fast as normal arrays when you're actually dealing with lots of data, but you have to be dealing with lots of data for that to actually start to be noticeable. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this content and you'll join me next time for some more tutorials on PowerShell or on Microsoft Azure.
And you know the routine, hashtag like and subscribe, and I hope you enjoyed this video and will join me next time. Goodbye.